Hey everyone, it's been a minute, and I'm going to just jump on this live fresh with my friend. I'm inviting my friend Liana Francisco to join. Hello, Liana, to join us. Okay. All right, Liana, we're going to have welcome. I just want to make sure that you can join us. So, yes. So, it's been a minute. Hi, Liana. There we go.
Hey, took a
There
little
we go.
longer than normal to get that started, but
Yeah.
how's it going?
Good. Good. How are you? We're here now, which is
I
good. So,
know, it's great. It's good. It has been a minute since you've done a live, which is really fun to be back on together. And last week,
it
oh,
is.
good, Kelly's here. Last weekend, Kelly and I did the
Kelly.
one, which was so fun and had a bunch of people on it and always so
Yeah,
cool.
it was really good. I got to watch bits and pieces, pause it, rewind, and start watching again, and it was great. It was really really good. If
Nice.
it's been a minute since I've been on Instagram. Actually, I've been off and on, but having a live, and this is a great. I think you and Kelly last week, you and I this week. We're slowly going to start offering more lives and interactions. Generally, we're on Clubhouse, but we're kind of shifting to have more video content and lives via Instagram, hopefully YouTube, things like that. But it's like slowly we're progressing. It's a slow move, but we're here to, as always, to support, answer questions, and have some great discussions that maybe if we're at home on our own with our kids, we don't always get to have. Maybe if we're not attending homeschool gatherings where parents can chat and discuss, this is a way for us to offer that to homeschooling parents. So, what do you say, Liana? Liana, I'll
I
let you
say
introduce
yes.
yourself in case anyone doesn't know your background on homeschooling and unschooling, and then we can begin our discussion, which is going to be a good one today.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Liana Francisco. I am a grown unschooler. That's what I generally contribute to these conversations about homeschooling is that, I'm 40 years old and I was raised unschooled entirely, no traditional education until I started college when I was 16. And I've done lots of different business type things in my life. But I have a couple businesses that I run, as well as being a homeschool parent and a foster parent. And I also just love being in these homeschool containers where I get to help people understand that it really is okay to homeschool and you really aren't going to mess up your kids if you're intentional about it, and that you can take a breath and make it happen for yourself, release that fear and be able to come together. So that's the big piece that I love to bring to the homeschooling conversations, is that lived experience that homeschooling works.
Right. And I think there's a few things. One, I love speaking with you because when people ask, but how are they really going to turn out? You are a great representation to say because you unschooled, you grew up never going to school. So I think you're a great person to ask questions. And also, as well, Liana has been on my podcast quite a few times. We've had great, I encourage you to go there. But this is one of the reasons why we wanted to have this discussion. It took me a minute because I wanted to make sure the link was in my bio. I linked a video that you sent me earlier this week, which was the
Mm-hmm.
John Oliver show on homeschooling. And so, if you haven't seen that or heard about that discussion on his show, I'm not a regular, I don't really watch his show, but I definitely watched that link that you sent me. I have linked it in my bio, so after you can go to my bio and view it, as well as an easy way to get to it. But he brought up a really, I guess for some, controversial, divisive, maybe not for some, not so much divisive discussion on homeschooling or his thoughts on homeschooling. We both, I think what I got out of it, and I think it's similar to you, was the idea for him that homeschooling's all right as long as there's regulation. And I know there's two sides to the coin. Some people feel like, no, homeschooling's not all right. It should be the job only of schools. Others feel the opposite. Maybe some are right in the middle. What is your idea on homeschooling? And maybe we can talk about some of the points that he brought into that discussion, or that commenting or commentation, because it wasn't really a discussion. It was
Yeah.
him talking to the camera
Yeah,
and
it was like an
audience.
essay. It was almost like an
Yes.
essay the way he does it. He does like these exposés or investigative reporting sort of energy. And he's a comedian too. Like
Yeah.
for those of you, I mean, I think most people probably know who he is, but he's a comedian. So like he's also going for like views and something kind of scandalous, something sort of
Mm-hmm.
tantalizing,
Shock
something that he
factor.
can make fun of. Yeah, his
Yeah.
shock factor. And you know, the thing that was most amazing to me about watching it is, you know, having been someone who's been in the homeschool community my whole life, I don't ever remember not having the word homeschooling in my world. um, I was shocked at kind of how far homeschooling's come, that it would be treated in such a serious, like, light, that it was actually, that it was considered relevant and real. There's like another word that I'm looking for that I'm not finding right now. I can't find this word that I'm looking for. I'll come back to it when I get to it. But basically, like, credible, I think, is part of it. You know, it's like
Right.
that. It's like a valid choice. Like there's so many people homeschooling that we're actually going to look at this, like, what does it mean for culture? And that,
Right.
to me, is like, homeschooling has come so far, because when I was a kid, homeschoolers were at most just like the butt of jokes. Oh, those weirdos. Like there was no thought that they could possibly impact culture because they weren't big enough. There wasn't,
Right.
they were so fringe. And now this thought that homeschooling is such a thing in our culture, in US culture in particular, definitely in Canada as well, from the conversations I've had with you, like that it's becoming something we have to talk about. How does this impact our culture? What does this mean that we're allowing this many people to have their children outside of school systems? What does that mean for child safety, which is like the big point that he brought up? But my first big takeaway was, oh, this is being treated as something real, not just a joke. Isn't it funny that people homeschool their kids? How could they possibly think they could do it? It wasn't that at all. It was a real treatment
Yeah.
and a real criticism of homeschooling. Um, but from also a very kind light. He flat out said at the beginning, he, like, that homeschooling can be wonderful. He said something about, like, you know, the ceiling for how great homeschooling can be is like, there isn't one. It can just be amazing, but also there isn't a floor for how bad it can be, is what
Right.
his argument was. And I, just that on its own, like, I assumed I was going to watch something where he was immediately critical of homeschooling. Can you believe these wackadoos that think they can educate their children at home as well as they could possibly do it in a school system? Because he tends to have kind of those, what I feel like is kind of like this group think sort of energy, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is what's normal, let's not go outside normal. And that's, so I was shocked that he was even saying homeschooling's great, but how are we making sure people are safe while they're homeschooling?
Yeah. And I think that you nailed it in that way. And I know we are going to talk about, if you, about confronting negative opinions and comments and rejection when it comes to homeschooling, and that's part of our discussion today. So if you have any questions, if you're listening, and any feedback, just put that in the chat, in the comments as well. We will answer any questions. I agree. I think that, one, like you said, it's no longer the fringe. It's becoming more accepted as more and more parents and families are embracing it. I also recognize that not every parent homeschools as well. Some homeschoolers seek homeschooling outside with somebody else, whether it's a co-op or different group, where the parents can't be the full-time homeschooling parents too. In that kind of, thinking of a school idea way, school learning kind of way. But yeah, it's less fringe. So it's entered the discussion. And with anything, when discussions like that become more mainstream public, you have the high ceiling and the bottom bar as well. I think it's also interesting because you're in the US and I'm in
Yeah.
Canada. So depending where we are, and depending if you're in a different, I get, so many letters from homeschoolers from my podcast. If you're in different parts of Europe, if you are in, I have listeners in, in Asia, I have listeners from India, Pakistan, Korea, Japan, Nigeria, Ghana, the Netherlands, like so many countries, Central America, um, and the feedback is that homeschooling is, the regulations are different everywhere you go. Some places it's illegal; you cannot
Yep.
do it at all. I've had families email and you say, "I love your podcast, but there is no way that we can legally do this," or we've
Yeah.
actually moved countries in order to be able to homeschool because it is so clamped down on in our country.
Yep.
Um, And then other places where the US actually is probably the least regulated. Canada, where I live in Canada, not every province in Canada, where I happen to live, it is more regulated, not as regulated as other provinces, but it is more regulated. So the conversation is a little bit different. It's interesting because we can bring that government regulation perspective. I can share that a bit more because that's my reality in homeschooling right now as well, compared to maybe another place where he brought his concerns, where if you don't have regulation, the absolute worst can happen. And that's what, that's what people are concerned about or fearful of, or trying to avoid. But the other part that was interesting was the comments after I watched that video. And there was a lot of comments from people who said, who had experienced maybe a negative experience growing up. But there was a lot of comments from people who said, hey, look, I was in school and it was actually, this is what happened. I came out of school because I was bullied so badly. I'm neurodiverse and I couldn't get any help and support. Or for some other reason, we started homeschooling and that's what helped me in my life. I was able to, be present, calm down, avoid negative environments, be supported, build on my learning, be encouraged. And therefore, I was able to do this as an adult because I had that experience separate from school.
Yes.
So it's interesting perspective. And some said, yes, I homeschooled all my life. Sure, there was some negatives, which I think with anything there's going to be, but it also helped me to do this. I'm able to do this now, or I entered a top university because I was then able to focus on this, where before I had complete distractions or this was happening. I was able to get one-on-one support. So it's, there's and again, I linked it in my bio if you want to watch the video and then also read the comments after as well.
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. And, so you listen to the conversation, this video, and he's talking about basically that one of the things he really gets down on is the HSLDA and their huge
Right.
lobbying effort to basically make sure that homeschooling has the least regulation that they can get away with, right? And when you first hear that, it's like he makes these amazing arguments that it's like kids are getting harmed and no one can see because they're home, because there are in the US, we're assuming kids are in school, and that's our way to check on them and make sure that they're safe, to have other grown-ups, be aware of what's going on in their lives, all of that. When you're listening to that, it's like such a valid argument, and these people sound like just crazy people that they would ever say that you shouldn't regulate homeschooling, because of course we need to keep children safe. And then I can also know from my experience being as old as I am in the homeschool community, when I was a little kid, the fear of your children being taken away from you because you were choosing to homeschool was so relevant. It was so real. It had only been a few years earlier that homeschooling was illegal in almost every state of the country, that people were homeschooling in civil disobedience, to say, no, we're going to take this right for our family. And so we're not that far away from this place where homeschoolers were persecuted for the decision to homeschool. It was not legal. It was not something you were allowed to do. It was considered a form of child abuse. People were prosecuted for it. And so you can see, of course, like, we need to make sure people are safe, and we need to understand and be realistic about the fact that there are people that have and continue to use homeschooling as a tool to oppress people. That's just truth. I mean, I knew families like that growing up. It is real. It is real. So as homeschoolers, we have a responsibility to be aware of that and to help make sure our communities are safe, right? But at the same time, we also need to know this legacy of homeschoolers being scared of not being allowed to raise their families how they want to raise their families. Legitimate, safe, wonderful homeschooling families not allowed to make these choices. And that wasn't that long ago. So we have a lot of work to do now as a culture to figure out, well, what do we do now? Now that there's so many people homeschooling, how do we make sure everyone's safe? How do we make sure that people are not being neglected educationally? That's a whole nother thing. We could have a whole other conversation about that, right? It's like, oh, that was very triggering to figure out, and how do they determine educational neglect?
That's right.
Based on what standards are they choosing to determine that, right? But it's a reasonable point to bring up, right? Yeah. And you can also see why people are so scared. Like, people we knew for sure, I mean, that had older kids than me growing up, they were still so scared of any authority figure and homeschooling because they knew that it was a threat to their existence as a family, really.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, especially with media and commentary and things like that, usually it's the shock or wow factor. And
Absolutely.
also referencing back to the discussion, if anyone has any stop or naysayers that are bringing that to them, and they bring this up, like, well, what about all of the abuse and the worry and the things that parents can that can happen. One thing we do have to remember is the context, and how so many things when they are brought in media is for that maybe specific viewpoint, or to add those little extra bells and whistles and things to
Yes.
help you go, oh, the shock factor, or to keep you watching and listening. I mean, here you go, John Oliver, we're sending people to this clip as it is right now, but there's so much more going on around. There's so many other variables and factors and environments as well that so often are missed. And it is important as well to showcase the good.
Yep.
And like you said, the intention. I think that's the difference, is when you're choosing to do that and live with intention. And I think that's the defining line. As much as, some people say, well, you can't be perfect all of the time and have a perfect day. No, you can't, but you can still choose to be intentional as best
Yes.
as you can. And I
Yeah.
think that is the point that's really, really important. So if someone said to you, yeah, well, you unschooled, you were one of the few lucky ones. What about all of these bad things that are happening in families across the United States, where there's no regulation, where it's a free for all, where kids are not getting their proper education because their parents decided to homeschool and they've taken them out because some crazy idea. And then what do you got? What's going to happen to our world, to the citizens? What's going to happen to our next generation?
Well, the first thing I would say is, parents are the biggest influence on children, whether they go to school or not, right? So the the indoctrination of some sort of radical values, or a disregard for science or something, that's going to come through no matter what. And a child is going to get some of that in their life no matter what, whether they're going to school or not, right? And so I do think that that it's an okay thing for us as homeschoolers to be examining laws, to be examining child safety as part of this homeschooling experience. I think that's okay. I'm not opposed to that at all. But the biggest thing I say to people is that this is not the vast wide majority of homeschoolers do not have this experience of educational neglect or abuse. That's just not the reality for most families. And I do think that we should be aware of, as a community, as a homeschooling community. I do think that we should be exploring ways to keep people safe. That all needs to happen, right? But that's not just because of homeschooling that a kid might be being hurt by their family in that way, right? It's just one aspect of it. So as a whole community, we need to look at how overall are we taking care of children, and maybe if they are isolated because of homeschooling, that is something that should be looked into. But it's the very small amount of homeschoolers compared to the majority of them out there, from my experience, from my lived experience.
Yeah, that's right. I do want to
Yeah.
mention that Kelly in 90 Minute School Day shared the nheri.org, which is actually a great site that is a research data site they have all of the research and studies on homeschooling. So that's a great site to go to get any information and source information from there as well, too. So we recommend that. Yes. And I think it's also, as a community, as neighbors, I think that is, I think as a society, we put a lot on schools to do everything and to be everything. And therefore, we think that if school is not happening, that it's the absolute downfall, and none of those things are going to happen, that it's just not possible to be aware of what's happening with children. It's just not possible to learn how to read. It's just not possible to be able to do certain things if you're not in the school classroom. I think I ask that, ask questions to the person that's asking you questions. What are their ideas on learning?
Yes.
What are their ideas on school? How connected are you with your neighbors, like your physical neighbors? Is there families around you? What do you see? If this is a big point and button an issue for you, how, it's not just on the schools and teachers to be the only ones that are going to say something. How about you and your community, and with those that are around you? If you see something, are you then quiet and think, oh, well, the school will take care of it? Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
homeschooling's problem because they actually don't go to school. And I'm not saying that people should be policing their communities, but at the same time, it's an interesting discussion when I feel so much responsibility and raising of our children are put on schools
Yeah.
and those within schools. And it's still, like you said, we still first people to raise our kids are parents, or
Yep.
us at home in the family
Yeah.
as well. So
Wow. Yeah, there's so much more we could talk
there
about
is.
this conversation. I feel like we could have like a series of like, now this point we can talk about, now this point we can talk about, now
So
this point.
So why don't we do that? Why don't we break it down to
Yeah.
those points, and then we continue with our discussions, and we'll focus on those specific points in our discussions to come. So I think one we can talk about is when they talk about the idea of not actually learning or getting
Yes.
what you need within that learning environment of school or homeschooling. Uh, let's talk about that, and what does that mean?
Yes.
Like, how would you know? How are they meeting the standards? And then again, is it all about the standards? Is that the only thing? Is that the only part of learning? Is that what learning only encompasses? Are those subjects and academic rigors? What's our next one?
Hmm. That's a really big one for me, but I want to go through the comments and see what some of the other comments are. I think it'll be really interesting also to look at comments from folks who feel like they had a poor educational experience, and say like, oh yeah, let's hash that out. Let's see what it was about that. That I think will be really, really interesting as
I
well.
think that's a great idea. Okay, so Liana and I, now it's up to us to make the date. You and Kelly have your next live planned
I don't know
or
if we have it
set?
scheduled yet,
Okay.
but it might be next weekend. I'm not sure. Kelly, let me know.
Okay, we will continue with our lives as well, whether it's Liana and I, Kelly and Liana, Kelly, Liana and I, or others as well, and or Kelly and I. I'm trying to think of all the combinations out there as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
other people. There's other Clubhouse hosts that we want to get in on this too.
that's right. That's right. So, okay,
Okay,
Kelly
Kelly
says
and I
next
next
week.
week for sure.
Okay.
Maybe Robyn will join us.
Yes, I will try my best. And if you want to see the video, it's linked in my bio, and you can read the comments as well, and you can prepare and share in the discussion as we break it down,
Yes.
the ideas and the comments of what's brought forth. I do think that when we're talking about um, meeting rejection or uh, conversing or speaking with naysayers, I think one of the most important things to do is get an understanding of where they're coming from. So, sometimes, and that's what I found, either they have no concept or idea of what homeschooling is, or that there is even homeschooling that works or is quote unquote good. Find out what they know, what their idea of children and family life is, what learning. And as well, then you're going to get into the whole discussion of politics and government and regulation too. So I think there's so many questions also, therefore ask those that are asking you to get a better idea of where the conversation is coming from. I hear your
Absolutely.
doorbell ringing and people
Yeah.
knocking at your door.
Who's here? Perfect. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it. Such a good live, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Talk to you soon, Liana.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.